It's official. Jodi Hildebrandt has pled guilty. Am I shocked? Actually, no. I expected that she would plead guilty because there is so much evidence against her.
Sounds great.
All rise. The district court in Washington County, State of Utah, now in session. The Honorable John J. Walton presiding. You may be seated.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to District Court. We are here this morning in the matter of State of Utah versus Jodi Hildebrandt, case 231501763. Mr. Clark and Mr. Sham are here representing the state of Utah, and Mr. Terry is here with Ms. Hildebrandt. We are scheduled for a waiver of preliminary hearing. Mr. Terry, appears you have just handed the court a signed plea agreement.
That is correct, Your Honor. With respect to the waiver, Ms. Hildebrandt, we have had discussions. She fully understands the purpose of a preliminary hearing, what the burden of proof would be, and that she has the right to a preliminary hearing, but in conjunction with the entry of her plea today, we waive the preliminary hearing.
And in fact, there is a provision in the written plea agreement that operates as a waiver of the preliminary hearing. All right. Ms. Hildebrandt, I've been handed a written document, a plea agreement with your signature on it. Did you sign that document?
Yes.
And you did that to represent to the court that you have read the document carefully, that you understand what you've read, that you agree to all of the terms that are set forth in that written document?
Yes, sir.
You've had sufficient time to ask Mr. Terry any questions that you have about the agreement or its potential effect?
Yes.
Is anyone pressuring you to enter into this agreement, or is anyone promising you anything that I haven't been told about or that is not in the written document?
No.
Are you under the influence of alcohol or drugs today?
No.
Is there anything today that could interfere in any way with your ability to understand the agreement, its potential consequences?
No.
No physical condition, mental health, or emotional condition, nothing that could interfere with your present ability to evaluate the agreement and decide if it's what you're prepared to do today?
No.
You don't need more time, you're ready to go.
Yes.
Any further record, counsel?
Your Honor, the agreement contains a factual basis. There are a few details in the factual basis that we are not in full agreement with. However, this is a guilty plea. It is not an Alford plea. The factual basis sets forth facts that we agree with, that Ms. Hildebrandt agrees with, that are sufficient for the court to accept her plea with respect to the 4 counts to which she is pleading guilty. And so we ask the court to accept her plea agreement.
And apart from what is in the written factual base in the plea agreement, you have, I'm assuming, reviewed voluminous discovery. You don't dispute whether there is an actual or an adequate factual basis.
We do not.
All right, then. Anything else before the court receives Ms. Hildebrandt's pleas?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing for the state, Your Honor.
Then, Ms. Hildebrandt, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, also aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
The court finds that there is a sufficient factual basis. The court, in addition, finds that Ms. Hildebrandt's pleas are made knowingly and voluntarily. The court, therefore, accepts and enters those pleas, dismisses the remaining 2 counts. We are anticipating a PSI, although part of the plea agreement appears to be that Ms. Hildebrandt will not contest a prison sentence.
Correct.
Is that right?
That is correct. But we are asking for a PSI.
All right, then the court orders the preparation of a pre-sentence investigation report and sets sentencing at 10:30 a.m. on February 20th. Anything else for today, counsel?
Nothing from us, Your Honor.
Nothing from us, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. We'll be in recess.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I expected that she would plead guilty because there is so much evidence against her, not to mention her bestie, Rubyfranke, agreed to testify against her. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the judge decides. What will her sentence be? She's got a lot of explaining to do, let's just say that. It's amazing to me to think of all the lives she has ruined, least of all the Franke family. Now, I am in no way trying to say that they're not culpable in this, especially Ruby, in all that has happened. But would any of this have actually happened if Ruby never met Jodi Hildebrandt? I don't know. I want to give you a timeline of events of what happened that brought Rubyfranke and her family to the point of no return with Jodi Hildebrandt. Now, when Jodi exactly came in the picture, we are not certain, but I'll give you a timeline of events of what we do know. Ruby and Kevin Franke started their 8 Passengers YouTube channel in 2015, and it quickly became a huge sensation, eventually getting 2.5 million subscribers. Within 5 years of the YouTube channel starting, The Frankes moved to a new home in Springville, Utah, and this was a substantial upgrade because of the millions of dollars they were making on their YouTube channel. Not everyone loved this channel, and by 2020, it was really coming under fire because of Ruby's parenting tactics, specifically when she took her son's bedroom away and forced him to sleep on a beanbag as a punishment.
Sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, Russell, he was like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on. And I was like, we're not going to Disneyland. And he started crying and hitting me. And then he went back to bed in tears and then...
After this video was posted, many people were enraged and thought this was ridiculous parenting technique because of the amount of punishment for a small prank. As disgusting as it is, I can't help but wonder, did this strict parenting come from Ruby herself and Kevin, or was Jodi already involved? Another example of strict parenting came in 2020 as well, when Ruby refused to bring lunch for her 6-year-old daughter at her school.
Got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children, because I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry, and hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
I did an entire video just about whether or not Rubyfranke's parenting was cringeworthy or whether it really was abuse. It was even featured on a Nightline episode, a little clip from my video. The question that I posed was whether or not these types of things are actually something that you should go to jail for, or if they're just simply cringeworthy. It's not until we find out more details of what was actually happening that we realize, yeah, she needs prison time. Continuing on with our timeline, in 2022, Ruby apparently had had enough with all the people who were raging against her, and she took down her channel. Well, she couldn't really go without the money. So in 2022, as soon as she took down that channel, she started a new one with her bestie, Jodi Hildebrandt. The business they started together is called Connections. As I was doing a deep dive into their business, Connections, I found many problems with it. So I did a video with a therapist that explained all the things wrong that Ruby and Jodi were doing with their new business. And speaking of blame, let's talk about Ruby's husband, Kevin. Jodi convinces Ruby and Kevin that they need to separate. I did an entire video depicting all three of these and talking about who's to blame. According to Kevin's attorney, he was just following the orders of his therapist, and apparently so was Ruby. They're both pointing their fingers directly at Jodi now. But what do you think? Does the blame all go on to her head? In 2022, Ruby and Kevin's oldest daughter, who was away at college, called in a welfare check. Sherry was very worried about her own siblings, and she reported to the police that her sisters and brother were being left home alone for long periods of time, and she wasn't even sure if they had food. And this was a significant piece in this timeline. To me, this piece is so significant because even though her father wasn't living at home, she was not able to call him and have him help with anything. This is where I'm like, oh, I just feel like he's responsible too. During my deep dive on Kevin, I just kept on coming up with, there were so many red flags. There were so many indications. Why is it that he was drinking the Jodi Hildebrandt Kool-Aid instead of protecting his own children? It's one thing to agree to live apart from your wife and think that you're helping the situation, but to let your children go without food, that's a whole nother level. Not to mention the other things that we soon find out that were happening to the kids. Which brings us to the next thing in the timeline, and that is late August when Ruby moves to Ivins, Utah to live with Jodi Hildebrandt, and she leaves 2 of her children back in Springville, Utah. Just like Ruby's oldest daughter claimed, the 2 of the children were left home alone, and 2 went to Ivins. But the 2 that went to Ivins were the 2 that were absolutely worse off. Because it's one thing to be left home alone and to not have food. These kids in Ivins, the description of what was happening to them is beyond belief. It's so horrendous. One of Rubyfranke's sons was able to escape from being held captive at Jodi Hildebrandt's home. He ran to a neighbor's, 911 was called, and finally, Jodi and Ruby were arrested. As soon as they were arrested, the police then searched the home in Springville in order to see if the other 2 children were safe. And they were in fact Ruby called a friend of theirs who was also in her connections group right before she was arrested to get the children. So they weren't in the home, but SWAT didn't know. They broke down the door, went in to see if those children were safe in Springville. Ruby's older daughter was then allowed to go in the home to get some supplies and some things for her 2 siblings that went into foster care. One other thing that Ruby did before she was arrested was she shot off a call to her estranged husband, Kevin. Eventually, Kevin goes to the home, and while he's in the home, he's upset because the door is broken down, and he's upset because he says things are missing. So what does he do? Goes after his oldest daughter and actually asks the police to arrest her. According to Kevin's attorney, Kevin was in the dark on all these things, and he didn't know why the door was broken down. He didn't know why things were missing. But wouldn't you give your daughter the benefit of the doubt, especially after you see what charges your wife and your therapist are charged with? Finally, by November, it appears that Kevin realizes, he finally understands the gravity of what his wife has done and what the therapist has done, and he files for divorce. And this is in the midst of him trying to get custody of his children. Then, in December 2023, Ruby goes to a waiver hearing and pleads guilty to 4 of the felony counts against her. She had 6, 2 were dropped in the agreement, but still with the 4 she has, we'll be finding out in February what her sentencing will be, but it could be a long time in prison. According to Ruby's attorney, Ruby is now blaming her therapist and best friend and business partner, Jodi Hildebrandt, for deceiving her. And Ruby has agreed that she will testify against Jodi Hildebrandt. There is nothing that's more important than the children who've had to live through these horrendous things. And the oldest daughter actually had to go in the hospital and get IV fluids and medication because of the stress of seeing her mother plead guilty to these horrendous charges. And it just didn't have to come to this. If the police would have taken action way back when Shari first notified them that things were not going well with her siblings. The police did go to the house, but they could not break down the door. At that time, they had no warrant. Now, I know hindsight is 20/20, but I'll bet there are people who wish warrants were issued back then. I think one of the most shocking things is the fact that Jodi was on the radar and has been for years. But she's a slick talker, and she's able to manipulate people all around her. Even though she was on probation at one point, her license was suspended, she got it back. And then she dove into this whole connections thing. Oh man, I think the amount of people who have been affected by the type of therapy that Jodi was doing is immeasurable. So now, according to Rubyfranke and her soon-to-be ex-husband, Kevin Franke, Jodi is the one to blame for everything. And, you know, when you hear of the things that Ruby pled guilty to, the types of things that she did to her children, and the types of things that Kevin claims that she did to their marriage, sound very familiar. It's definitely a pattern with therapist Jodi Hildebrandt that she has done over and over to many people.
Us in, treating us kind and fun, and then she came out with these radical ideas. She used the peer pressure of entire groups and all parties involved to destroy your soul, to try to convince you that crazy wrong ideas were correct. And then just suddenly, before you realized it, it was like being a fish and biting a hook. She had you in so deep that you were, you were fighting for your life to try to get away from her, and all parties, the safety of all parties involved, and there was nothing you could do but get your life destroyed.
And she would tell me all the time, if you just confess, I will stop. If you confess, I will stop, which is torture. So she strips you of identity, she strips you of credibility, and she isolates. And so she's saying everything that you say is a lie. Everything that you say is manipulation. You're manipulating everyone around you. You're lying and destroying everyone's life.
Jodi's niece described the type of therapy sessions that her aunt did for her were very similar, almost exact, to the things that Ruby just recently pled guilty to for her own children. If only the police would have believed Jessie all those years ago when she escaped the therapeutic ways of Jodi Hildebrandt. How many other people wouldn't have had their lives destroyed by this horrible therapist? Let's just talk about Ruby's family alone, since that is what's going to actually bring Jodi down. All that she did to Ruby's family. Now, there might be cases in the future where other families go out and do civil cases against Jodi. There's a few already pending now. But Ruby's is the one that's current and that she's going to spend prison time over. I'm staying on this case. I've followed it from the beginning, and I will not let it go until every single person has accounted for what they have done to those poor Franke children. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you again soon. See ya.